I learned to see through flesh on a Tuesday in November, and by winter's end, I would discover that some secrets are not meant to be illuminated. The human body, I came to understand, is merely a veil, and beneath it lies either truth or machinery, and sometimes both. The laboratory smelled of copper and ozone, that sharp electric scent that clung to my hair and the wool of my dress even hours after I left each evening. I had been Dr. Hartwell's assistant for 8 months, though the term assistant hardly captured the nature of my work. I prepared the photographic plates with silver nitrate solutions, my fingers stained perpetually gray. I calibrated the voltage regulators on the X-ray apparatus, that magnificent and terrible machine that stood in the center of our workspace like an altar to invisible light. I kept meticulous records of exposure times, aperture settings, and the ghostly images that emerged from our experiments. The doctor, brilliant though he was, possessed the mind of a theorist and the hands of a philosopher. It was I who made his visions manifest, I who coaxed the bones and metals hidden in flesh to reveal themselves on glass. London, in 1897, was a city of contradictions. Gas lamps still flickered along the Thames, casting their yellow glow over cobblestones slick with rain and fog. Yet in laboratories like ours, electricity crackled through copper wires and transformed the very nature of seeing. Steam engines powered the factories that belched smoke into already gray skies, while in drawing rooms and lecture halls, men debated whether science would save humanity or doom it. I lived between these worlds, a woman who understood cathode rays and electromagnetic fields, yet was expected to lower her eyes when gentlemen entered the room. Our laboratory occupied the second floor of a narrow building in Southwark, near the docks where ships unloaded their cargo of tea and silk and stranger things. The neighborhood was not fashionable. Respectable women did not walk these streets after dark, and even in daylight, one encountered sailors with foreign accents, merchants hawking mechanical curiosities, and occasionally, individuals whose augmentations were visible beneath their clothing, the glint of brass joints or the soft whir of clockwork lungs. The new surgery, they called it, though it was whispered about more than discussed. Men returned from war with steam-powered limbs. Factory workers replaced damaged organs with devices that ticked and hissed. The line between human and machine grew thinner each year, and no one quite knew whether to call it progress or blasphemy. Dr. Hartwell believed in documentation above all else. Every patient who came through our doors, every bone we photographed, every foreign object we located within living tissue, was recorded in leather-bound journals that lined the shelves of his office. He was a small man, fastidious and kind, with spectacles that constantly slipped down his nose and ink stains on his shirt cuffs. He treated me with respect unusual for the time, perhaps because he had no daughters of his own, or perhaps because he genuinely valued competence over propriety. When other physicians scoffed at the notion of a female assistant working with radiographic equipment, Dr. Hartwell simply adjusted his spectacles and reminded them that Marie Curie had just shared the Davy Medal for her work on radiation. I was grateful to him, though I knew my position remained precarious. One scandal, one accusation of impropriety, and I would be cast back into the narrow world of needlework and social calls that had nearly suffocated me before I found this work. The evening the Duke of Ashbourne first appeared, I was alone in the laboratory. Dr. Hartwell had been called away to attend a lecture at the Royal Society, leaving me to develop the plates from our afternoon session. I worked by the light of a gas lamp turned low, the red safe light necessary for handling photographic materials, casting everything in shades of blood and shadow. The chemicals in their baths gave off fumes that made my eyes water, but I had learned to breathe shallowly and ignore the discomfort. Outside, rain drummed against the windows, and somewhere in the distance, a steam whistle shrieked as a train departed the station. I heard his footsteps on the stairs before I heard the knock. They were measured, deliberate. The footsteps of a man who had never hurried in his life. When the knock came, it was firm but not aggressive. 2 sharp raps that somehow conveyed both authority and courtesy. I set down the plate I was holding and wiped my stained fingers on my apron before crossing to the door. We did not typically receive visitors at this hour, and I felt a flutter of apprehension as I turned the lock. The door opened to reveal a man who seemed to have stepped from a different world entirely. He was tall, well over 6 feet, with the bearing of someone accustomed to command. His overcoat was impeccably tailored, black wool that gleamed faintly in the dim light, and his gloves were of the finest leather. Beneath a silk top hat, his face was angular and pale, with high cheekbones and a mouth set in a line that suggested either great control or great pain. But it was his eyes that arrested me. They were gray, the color of London fog, and they held a depth of weariness that seemed at odds with his youth. He could not have been more than 35, yet he looked at me as if he had already lived several lifetimes. "Good evening," he said, his voice low and cultured, the accent of old money and older bloodlines. "I am seeking Dr. Hartwell. I understand he conducts radiographic examinations here." I found my voice, though my heart had begun to beat faster for reasons I could not name. "Dr. Hartwell is attending a lecture this evening, sir. He will return tomorrow morning. If you would care to leave your card, I can ensure he receives it." The man's gaze moved past me, taking in the laboratory with its tangle of wires and glass apparatus, the X-ray tube suspended from its articulated arm like some mechanical insect, the shelves of chemicals and photographic supplies. Something flickered in his expression, a momentary intensity that vanished almost before I registered it. "I see," he said, returning his attention to me. "And you are?" "Eleanor Hartwell," I replied, using the surname I had adopted for professional purposes, though we were not related by blood. "I am Dr. Hartwell's assistant. I handle the radiographic equipment and photographic processes." His eyebrows rose fractionally, surprise briefly breaking through his composed facade. "A woman operates the X-ray apparatus. How remarkable!" There was no condescension in his tone, only what seemed like genuine interest. I straightened my spine, prepared to defend my position, as I had done countless times before. "Someone must," I said. "The doctor is a theorist. I am a practitioner." A faint smile touched his lips, so brief I might have imagined it. "I appreciate the distinction," he said. "I am Ashbourne. I have been following Dr. Hartwell's work with great interest, and I wish to offer my patronage. The advancement of radiographic science strikes me as worthy of support. Ashbourne, the Duke of Ashbourne, of course. I knew of him by reputation, as everyone in London did. Old aristocracy, vast estates in the north, a recluse who rarely appeared in society. There had been talk, years ago, of some scandal or tragedy, but I could not recall the details. He had vanished from public life, and only recently had his name begun to appear again in connection with charitable donations and investments in scientific endeavors. "I see," I said, uncertain of the proper protocol. "That is very generous, Your Grace. I am certain Dr. Hartwell would be honored to discuss his work with you. Shall I arrange an appointment?" He removed one glove, a curiously deliberate gesture, and reached into his coat to withdraw a card case. His hand, when revealed, was as pale as his face, long-fingered and elegant. He extracted a card and held it out to me. "Tomorrow evening, if convenient," he said. "I prefer to conduct such discussions away from the bustle of daylight hours. I find I work best in the quiet of evening." I took the card, our fingers not quite touching, and felt an odd sensation, as if the air between us had suddenly grown charged, electric. "Of course," I said. "I will inform Dr. Hartwell of your visit." He replaced his glove with the same careful precision, nodded once, and turned to leave. But at the doorway, he paused and looked back at me. "Miss Hartwell," he said, and there was something in his voice I could not quite identify, a note of something almost like sorrow. "Be careful with that apparatus. Radiation, I am told, can be quite dangerous. One never knows what damage might be done, visible or otherwise." Before I could respond, he was gone, his footsteps receding down the stairs and out into the rainy November night. I stood holding his card, my hand trembling slightly, though whether from cold or something else entirely I could not say. The card was simple, engraved with his name and a Mayfair address, nothing unusual. Yet I found myself staring at it long after I should have returned to my work, studying the precise letters as if they might reveal some hidden meaning. I told myself it was merely the surprise of receiving such a distinguished visitor. I told myself the strange intensity I had felt was simply nerves, the natural reaction of a woman of modest background encountering a duke. But as I finally returned to the developing trays and watched the ghostly images of bones emerge from the chemical bath, I could not shake the memory of those gray eyes, nor the peculiar certainty that the Duke of Ashbourne had not come to our laboratory out of mere scientific curiosity. He had come looking for something, or someone. And I could not escape the unsettling feeling that whatever he sought, it had something to do with me. Dr. Hartwell was delighted by the news of the Duke's patronage. He arrived the following morning in high spirits, practically trembling with excitement as he read and reread the Duke's card. "Do you understand what this means, Eleanor?" he asked, polishing his spectacles with such vigor I feared he might scratch the lenses. "The Duke of Ashbourne is one of the wealthiest men in England. With his support, we could expand our research, acquire better equipment, perhaps even establish a proper radiographic clinic. This could change everything." I shared his enthusiasm, of course. The work we did was important, revealing fractures and foreign objects that no surgeon's knife could find without causing terrible damage. But I could not quite suppress the strange unease that had settled over me since the Duke's visit. There had been something in his manner, something in the way he had looked at me, that suggested his interest extended beyond the purely scientific. That evening, as the November darkness fell early and the fog rolled in from the Thames, the Duke of Ashbourne returned. This time, Dr. Hartwell was present, and he greeted our visitor with the enthusiasm of a man who had just discovered a new element. "Your Grace, what an honor. What an absolute honor," the doctor stammered, bowing slightly. "Please, come in. Let me show you our equipment, explain our methods." The Duke entered with the same measured grace he had displayed the previous evening. He was dressed similarly in dark, expensive clothing that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. His eyes found mine immediately, held for a moment, then moved on to examine the laboratory. For the next hour, Dr. Hartwell demonstrated our apparatus, explaining the principles of cathode rays and electromagnetic radiation with the passion of a true devotee. The Duke listened attentively, asked intelligent questions, and occasionally touched the equipment with his gloved hands as if testing its reality. "Fascinating," he murmured at one point, studying the X-ray tube. "To see through the body without cutting, to reveal what is hidden. It must feel rather like possessing a supernatural power." "It is merely physics," Dr. Hartwell replied, smiling. "Light that our eyes cannot perceive, captured on photographic plates. There is nothing supernatural about it, though I confess the images can seem otherworldly." The Duke's gaze shifted to me. "And you, Miss Hartwell," he said, "you operate this machinery yourself. You have seen these ghostly images. Do they ever disturb you?" I met his eyes, determined not to be unsettled by the intensity of his attention. "At first they did," I admitted. "It seemed wrong, somehow, to look inside a living person. But I have come to see it as a form of truth. The X-ray does not lie. It shows what is, not what appears to be." Something changed in his expression, a tightening around his eyes, as if I had said something that caused him pain. "Truth," he repeated softly. "Yes, I suppose it does." The conversation turned to practical matters then. The Duke offered a generous sum to fund our work, with the understanding that he might occasionally visit to observe our progress. Dr. Hartwell agreed with such enthusiasm, I thought he might weep with joy. Papers were signed, promises made, and when the Duke finally departed, He left behind not only a bank draft, but also an unsettling sense of things left unspoken. Over the following weeks, the Duke became a regular visitor to our laboratory. He came always in the evening, always alone, and always with that same quality of contained intensity. He observed our work, asked questions, and occasionally assisted with minor tasks, his movements precise and careful. Dr. Hartwell was too overjoyed by his patronage to notice anything unusual, but I could not help observing the small peculiarities in our benefactor's behavior. He never removed his coat, even when the laboratory grew warm from the heat of the X-ray apparatus. He never accepted our offers of tea or refreshment. And most tellingly, whenever Dr. Hartwell suggested he might like to experience a radiographic examination himself, to see the marvel of his own bones rendered visible, the Duke politely but firmly declined. "There is no need," he would say. "I am in perfect health. I would not wish to waste your valuable time on idle curiosity." But it was not the refusal itself that struck me as odd. It was the way he said it, with a tension in his voice that suggested fear more than indifference. And I began to wonder what the Duke of Ashbourne was hiding beneath that impeccably tailored coat. What secret he guarded so carefully that he would not allow even the penetrating light of our X-ray apparatus to touch him. I should have kept my curiosity in check. I should have remained professional, detached, focused on my work. But as the weeks passed and winter settled over London with its bone-deep cold and endless gray skies, I found my thoughts returning again and again to the enigmatic Duke. And despite every rational warning, despite the vast gulf of class and circumstance that separated us, I felt something growing in my chest that I had no right to feel. I was falling in love with a man who might not even be entirely human, and I had no idea how deep into darkness that love would lead me. December arrived with frost that painted the windows in crystalline patterns and fog so thick one could barely see across the street. The Thames froze at its edges, and in the mornings, the laboratory was cold enough that my breath misted in the air until I lit the gas heater. London became a city of muffled sounds and hidden faces, everyone wrapped in scarves and coats, moving through the streets like shadows in a dream. The Duke came more frequently now, 3 or 4 evenings each week, always as darkness fell and the respectable world retreated indoors. He brought with him not only financial support, but also a collection of medical cases that Dr. Hartwell found fascinating. Patients came recommended by the Duke, individuals who needed radiographic examination but could not afford it, or who wished for discretion. A factory worker with metal fragments embedded in his chest from an explosion. A young woman who had swallowed her mother's brooch in a moment of grief-stricken madness. A sailor with a bullet lodged near his spine. A souvenir from some foreign conflict he refused to discuss. We treated them all, and I noticed that the Duke observed each examination with particular intensity. His gray eyes fixed not on the patients themselves, but on the images that emerged from the developing solution. He studied the ghostly radiographs as if searching for something, though what I could not fathom. Dr. Hartwell attributed it to scientific curiosity, but I sensed something deeper, more personal, in the Duke's attention. It was during one such evening, as we examined a clockmaker who had accidentally driven a spring steel wire through his palm, that I first noticed the Duke's reaction to certain sounds. The X-ray apparatus produced a characteristic hum when activated, a vibration that seemed to resonate in one's bones. But when the clockmaker's breathing grew labored and his heart rate accelerated from pain, something changed in the Duke's demeanor. He went very still, his hand moving unconsciously to his chest, pressing against his coat as if to quiet something within. I might have dismissed it as sympathy or discomfort at the patient's distress, but I saw his face in profile lit by the red safe light, and the expression I glimpsed was not sympathy. It was recognition, as if he understood that pain in a way that went beyond mere observation. The moment passed. The examination concluded. The clockmaker departed with assurances that the wire had missed all major vessels and would heal cleanly. But I could not forget what I had seen, and when the Duke left that evening, I found myself standing at the window, watching his tall figure disappear into the fog, wondering what wounds he carried beneath that perfect exterior. Dr. Hartwell, bless him, noticed nothing unusual. He was too delighted with the Duke's patronage, too absorbed in his plans for expansion. We would move to larger premises in the new year, he announced. We would acquire a second X-ray apparatus, perhaps hire an additional assistant. The future seemed bright, full of possibility, and I tried to share his enthusiasm. But I could not shake the feeling that we were building our hopes on foundations I did not fully understand. The Duke began to arrive earlier, sometimes before Dr. Hartwell, and I would find myself alone with him in the laboratory, surrounded by the smell of chemicals and the soft hiss of gas lamps. We did not speak much during these moments. He would examine our equipment, running his gloved fingers over the copper wiring and glass tubes with a reverence that bordered on tenderness, while I prepared the evening's supplies. Yet the silence between us was not empty. It felt charged, heavy with things unspoken, and I was acutely aware of his presence in a way that made my hands tremble as I measured out silver nitrate solutions. One evening, perhaps 3 weeks after his first visit, I dropped a photographic plate. It slipped from my fingers and shattered on the floor, glass fragments scattering across the worn boards. I gasped, more from embarrassment than pain, though a shard had cut my palm. Blood welled up, dark red in the dim light, and I pressed my other hand against it reflexively. The Duke moved faster than I would have thought possible. He was beside me in an instant, his hand catching my wrist with surprising gentleness. "You are hurt," he said, and his voice held an urgency that seemed disproportionate to the minor injury. "It is nothing," I assured him. "Merely a scratch. I have had worse." But he did not release my wrist. Instead, he drew me toward the light, tilting my hand to examine the cut. His touch was careful, almost reverent, and I felt the warmth of his fingers through his gloves. For a moment, we stood very close, close enough that I could smell the faint scent of bergamot and something else, something mechanical, like oil and heated metal. "You must be more careful," he said quietly. "You are too valuable to risk harm." The words could have been professional courtesy, concern for Dr. Hartwell's indispensable assistant. But the way he said them, the intensity in his gray eyes as they met mine, suggested something else entirely. My heart began to beat faster, a rhythm I was certain he could feel through my wrist. Dr. Hartwell arrived then, bustling in with apologies about the traffic and the cold, and the moment shattered like the glass at our feet. The Duke released my hand and stepped back, his expression smoothing into polite neutrality. I wrapped my palm in a clean cloth and told the doctor it was nothing, just a small accident, already forgotten. But I had not forgotten, and I did not think the Duke had either. After that evening, something shifted between us. The Duke began to speak to me more directly, asking about my background, my interest in science, my thoughts on the radiographic work. I told him the truth, or as much of it as seemed safe to share. I had been raised by an aunt after my parents died of cholera. I had educated myself through books borrowed from circulating libraries and lectures attended in disguise, wearing my aunt's widow's veil to gain entry to venues that would not admit unmarried young women. I had taught myself chemistry and physics because I found the world more bearable when I understood its rules, when I could see the patterns beneath the chaos. He listened with an attention that felt like a physical touch, and when I asked him about his own life, he deflected with practiced ease. His family, he said, was old and complicated. His title was a burden he had inherited too young. He preferred the company of scientists and engineers to that of his peers in society because they dealt in truth rather than performance. "And yet," I said, meeting his eyes across the laboratory, "you perform very well, Your Grace. You play the part of the beneficent patron with great skill." He smiled then, a real smile that transformed his face from austere to almost beautiful. "Perhaps," he admitted, "but there are some roles one cannot escape, no matter how convincing the performance." I wanted to ask what role he was trapped in, what part he played that cost him so dearly. But Dr. Hartwell called me to assist with a patient, and the conversation ended. The winter deepened. Christmas came and went, marked by frost and carol singers and the ringing of church bells across the city. The Duke sent gifts, books on radiographic theory for Dr. Hartwell, and, to my surprise, a set of precision instruments for me, tools so fine they must have cost a small fortune. The accompanying card was brief, for the practitioner, from an admirer of truth. I held that card for a long time, studying the strong, precise handwriting, wondering what he meant by it. Was it merely appreciation for my work, or was there something more personal in the sentiment? I had no way to know, and the uncertainty was its own kind of torment. In January, the cold broke briefly, and London experienced a few days of unseasonable warmth. The fog lifted, revealing a sky of pale winter blue, and people emerged from their homes like creatures waking from hibernation. The Duke arrived on one of these clear evenings, and for the first time he seemed almost cheerful, or at least less burdened than usual. Dr. Hartwell had been called away to consult on a case at St. Thomas's Hospital, leaving me alone in the laboratory. I was calibrating the X-ray apparatus, a delicate task that required adjusting the voltage and checking the vacuum seal in the tube. The Duke watched for a while, then asked if he might assist. I showed him how to read the voltmeter, how to adjust the rheostat to control the current flowing through the cathode. He learned quickly, his movements precise and confident, and I found myself relaxing in his presence, the usual tension between us easing into something almost like partnership. "You have a gift for this," I told him. "You understand the machinery intuitively." He glanced at me, something unreadable in his expression. "I have always been drawn to mechanisms," he said. "There is a purity in their function. They do exactly what they are designed to do, no more and no less. There is no deception in a well-made machine." "Unlike people," I said softly. "Unlike people," he agreed. We worked in silence for a while longer, and then he asked me something I had not expected. "Eleanor," he said, using my given name for the first time, "do you believe there is a soul? Something beyond the physical body, beyond what your X-rays can reveal?" I paused in my work, surprised by the question. It was not the sort of thing men of science typically asked, at least not in such a direct manner. I thought carefully before answering. "I do not know," I said honestly. "I see bones and organs, blood and tissue. I see foreign objects and abnormalities. But whether there is something more, something that cannot be photographed or measured, I cannot say." "Why do you ask?" He turned away, looking out the window at the darkening sky. "Because I wonder," he said quietly, "if the absence of a soul is something that can be detected. If one looked closely enough, with the right equipment, could one see the void where something essential should be?" The words chilled me, not because of what they said, but because of the tone in which he said them. There was such sadness in his voice, such profound loneliness, that I felt my heart ache in response. "Your Grace," I said, moving closer to him, "if you are unwell, if there is something wrong, perhaps we could examine you. Whatever the X-ray reveals, it would be held in strictest confidence." He turned to look at me then, and I saw something in his eyes I had not seen before. It was fear, raw and undisguised, the kind of fear that comes from knowing something terrible and being unable to prevent it. "No," he said, his voice rough, "you must not. If you were to see what I am, what I have become, you would turn from me in horror. And I could not bear that. I could not bear to see revulsion in your eyes where now there is only kindness." I reached out without thinking and touched his arm, feeling the solid warmth of him through the expensive wool of his coat. "I do not believe that," I said. "Whatever you are, whatever has happened to you, it could not make me turn away." He looked at my hand on his arm, then at my face, and for a moment I thought he might tell me. I thought he might trust me with whatever secret he carried. But then he shook his head, gently removed my hand, and stepped back. "You do not know what you are saying," he told me. "You do not know what I have done, what price I have paid. It is better this way, Eleanor. Better that you see me as I appear, rather than as I truly am." And before I could respond, before I could tell him that appearance meant nothing to me, that I had spent too many hours looking beneath surfaces to be deceived by them, he left. The door closed behind him with a soft click, and I stood alone in the laboratory, my hand still warm from the brief contact, my heart hammering in my chest with a mixture of frustration and fear, and something else I was not yet ready to name. That night, I could not sleep. I lay in my narrow bed in the boarding house where I rented a room, listening to the sounds of the city beyond my window, the distant clatter of carriage wheels and the mournful whistle of trains. I thought about the Duke, about the sadness in his eyes and the fear in his voice. I thought about his questions regarding souls and voids and essential absences. And I began to form a theory, one so impossible that I almost laughed at myself for entertaining it. What if the Duke was one of them, one of the augmented, the mechanically enhanced individuals who walked the streets of London with parts of themselves replaced by clockwork and steam? The technology existed, I knew that. I had seen patients with artificial limbs, with mechanical hearts that ticked audibly in their chests. But those were desperate measures, last resorts for the dying or the maimed. The Duke of Ashburn appeared to be in perfect health. Why would a man of his status and wealth subject himself to such invasive procedures? Unless he had not been given a choice. Unless something had happened to him, some accident or illness that had necessitated intervention. And if that were true, if beneath his impeccable clothing he carried machinery where there should have been flesh, it would explain everything: his refusal to be examined, his questions about souls, his fear that I would see him as he truly was and turn away in horror. I should have left it alone. I should have respected his privacy and continued my work with professional detachment. But I was already too far gone. I was already in love with him, though I had not yet admitted it even to myself. And I could not bear the thought of him suffering alone, believing himself to be something less than human, because part of him had been replaced by machinery. So I made a decision that would change everything. I decided that I would find a way to see the truth, to look beneath the surface and discover what the Duke of Ashbourne was so desperate to hide. Not because I wished to expose him, but because I needed him to know that whatever I saw, whatever he was, it would not change how I felt. I had no idea then how devastating the truth would prove to be. I had no idea that when I finally saw what he carried in his chest, it would not be machinery alone that would be revealed, but a secret so personal, so intimately connected to me, that it would shatter the careful distance I had maintained between us. All of that lay ahead, in the dark January nights to come. But for now, I simply lay in my bed, watching the shadows move across the ceiling, and planned how I might save a man who had already decided he was beyond salvation. The next time the Duke came to the laboratory, I watched him with new eyes. I noticed the way he never touched his left hand to his chest, the way he breathed in a rhythm that seemed almost too regular, too mechanical. I noticed that he never ate or drank in our presence, always declining refreshment with polite excuses. And I noticed, most tellingly, that on particularly cold evenings, when the laboratory's heat was slow to build, I could sometimes hear a faint sound from him, a soft, rhythmic ticking that might have been a pocket watch, but seemed to emanate from somewhere deeper, somewhere more essential. I said nothing. I maintained my professional demeanor and continued my work. But I was gathering evidence, assembling the pieces of a puzzle I was not yet ready to solve. And I was waiting, with a patience I did not know I possessed, for the moment when the truth would finally reveal itself. I did not have to wait long. Fate, or perhaps something darker, was already preparing the circumstances that would force the Duke to show me exactly what he was. And when that moment came, when the laboratory filled with fire and electricity and the Duke fell unconscious at my feet, I would finally understand the full scope of what he had been protecting me from. I would understand that love and machinery are not as incompatible as one might think. And I would learn that my name, engraved in metal and hidden in the dark chambers of an artificial heart, was both the greatest gift and the most terrible burden a man could carry. The accident happened on a Thursday evening in late January, when the temperature had dropped so low that ice formed on the inside of the windows and the Thames was choked with fragments of frozen fog. Dr. Hartwell had gone to collect a patient from St. Bartholomew's Hospital, a woman with a suspected obstruction in her digestive tract, and I was alone in the laboratory preparing the equipment for her examination. The Duke had arrived early, as had become his habit. He moved through the space with the ease of familiarity now, no longer a visitor, but something closer to a colleague, though we both knew that was not quite accurate either. What we were to each other remained undefined, suspended in that dangerous territory between professional association and something more intimate. We did not speak of it. We maintained the fiction that his presence was purely academic, that my awareness of every movement he made was merely attentiveness to a patron's comfort. I was adjusting the voltage regulator when I noticed the wire. It had come loose from its insulation, probably worn through by months of use and the corrosive effects of ozone from the X-ray tube. The exposed copper gleamed in the lamplight, and I felt a spike of concern. Electricity was dangerous enough when properly contained, but a loose wire near the high-voltage apparatus could prove fatal. "Your Grace," I said, turning to find him closer than I had expected, examining a set of radiographic plates on the light table. "There is a problem with the wiring. I need to shut down the system and repair it before Dr. Hartwell returns." He looked up, his gray eyes meeting mine with that intensity that still made my breath catch. "Show me," he said. I hesitated. It was not appropriate for a duke to involve himself in such manual work, and yet I had learned that he did not stand on ceremony as others of his rank might. I led him to the apparatus and pointed out the damaged insulation. "There," I said, "the wire has worn through. If it makes contact with the metal housing while the system is active, it could cause a short circuit or worse." He leaned in to examine it, and I caught that scent again. Bergamot and heated metal, a combination that had become inextricably associated with him in my mind. "Can it be repaired?" he asked. "Yes," I said, "but I must disconnect the power first. It will take perhaps an hour to properly insulate the wire and test the system." I should have done it immediately. I should have shut down the apparatus and completed the repair before proceeding with any other task. But at that moment, we heard footsteps on the stairs, rapid and heavy, and Dr. Hartwell burst through the door with the urgency of a man bearing terrible news. "Eleanor," he gasped, his face flushed and his spectacles askew. "The patient, Mrs. Ashford, she has collapsed in the street outside the hospital. They are bringing her here directly, but she is fading quickly. We must be ready to examine her the moment she arrives. She may have internal bleeding, something we cannot see without the X-ray." I glanced at the exposed wire, then at Dr. Hartwell's desperate face. The man was not prone to dramatics. If he said the situation was urgent, it was. "I need 10 minutes to repair the wiring," I said. "It is not safe to operate the machine as it is." "We do not have 10 minutes, Dr. Hartwell said, and there was genuine anguish in his voice. "Eleanor, I know the risks, but this woman will die if we cannot locate the source of her bleeding. Please." The Duke touched my arm, a brief contact that nevertheless sent awareness through me like a current. "Let me help," he said. "I can hold the wire away from the housing while you operate the machine. It should be safe enough if we are careful. I should have refused. I should have insisted on proper procedure, on safety over speed." But Mrs. Ashford was dying, and I had not become Dr. Hartwell's assistant to let patients perish because I was too cautious. I looked into the Duke's eyes and saw determination there, and something else. Trust. He was trusting me to know what I was doing, to keep us both safe. "Very well," I said. "But you must not touch the wire directly. Use these rubber gloves, And if you feel any sensation at all, any tingling or heat, you must release it immediately." He nodded and pulled on the thick rubber gloves we used for handling electrical components. I positioned him beside the apparatus, showed him how to hold the loose wire away from the metal housing using an insulated tool, and then I began to prepare the system for operation. The patient arrived moments later, unconscious and gray-faced, carried between two orderlies from the hospital. Dr. Hartwell and I worked quickly, positioning her on the examination table, adjusting the X-ray tube to the correct angle. The Duke held the wire steady, his concentration absolute, and I tried not to think about what would happen if something went wrong. I activated the apparatus. The familiar hum began, building in intensity as voltage surged through the cathode tube. The lights dimmed slightly, as they always did when we drew heavy current, and I counted off the seconds of exposure, watching the patients still form and praying we would find the internal injury before it was too late. And then everything happened at once. There was a smell of burning insulation, sharp and acrid, a flash of blue light. The Duke shouted something I could not make out over the sudden roar of sparking electricity. I reached for the power switch, desperate to shut down the system. But before my hand could close on it, there was a tremendous crack like thunder in an enclosed space, and the main transformer exploded in a shower of sparks and burning oil. The force of it threw me backward. I struck the wall and slid down, stunned, my ears ringing and my vision filled with dancing spots of light. Through the haze, I saw flames licking up the side of the apparatus, saw Dr. Hartwell beating at them with his coat, saw the patient being dragged from the table by the orderlies. And I saw the Duke. He was on the floor, motionless, his body sprawled in a position that suggested he had been thrown with considerable force. His coat had been torn open by the blast, revealing the white shirt beneath, and there was a smell in the air that made no sense, a smell of burning metal and scorched circuitry that should not have been present in a room where nothing but the electrical equipment contained such components. "Your Grace," I gasped, crawling toward him. My legs did not seem to want to support my weight, and my hands shook violently as I reached for him. Dr. Hartwell appeared beside me, his face blackened with soot, but his eyes alert. He pressed his fingers to the Duke's throat, feeling for a pulse. "He is alive," he said, "but unconscious. We must move him away from the fire." Between us, we dragged the Duke to the far side of the laboratory, away from the burning apparatus. The orderlies had gotten the patient out and were calling for the fire brigade. Dr. Hartwell ran to assist them, shouting instructions about water and sand to smother the electrical fire. And I was left alone with the Duke. He lay on his back, his face pale in the firelight, beautiful and terrible in his stillness. His coat had fallen completely open, and I could see his chest rising and falling in a rhythm that seemed somehow wrong, too regular, too mechanical. And there was that smell again, stronger now, the unmistakable scent of heated metal. I should have left him. I should have called for help and waited for a proper physician to attend him. But something in me knew with absolute certainty that if anyone else examined the Duke of Ashbourne, if anyone else saw what I suspected lay beneath his clothing, the consequences would be catastrophic. He would be exposed, possibly dissected in the name of science, certainly stripped of his dignity and his carefully maintained privacy. I could not let that happen. Whatever he was, whatever secret he carried, he had trusted me. He had risked himself to help with the repair, had held that dangerous wire steady so that we might save a dying woman. I owed him at least the privacy he had fought so hard to maintain. But I also needed to know if he was truly injured, if the explosion had damaged him in ways that required immediate intervention. And there was only one way to find out. The X-ray apparatus was destroyed, but we had a second, smaller unit that Dr. Hartwell used for teaching demonstrations. It was less powerful, produced inferior images, but it would suffice. I retrieved it from the cabinet where it was stored, my hands moving with automatic efficiency despite the trembling in my limbs. I set it up beside the Duke's unconscious form, positioned the tube over his chest, and placed a fresh photographic plate beneath him. Even then, I hesitated. This was a violation of his explicit wishes, a betrayal of the trust he had placed in me. But he was injured, possibly dying, and I had to know the extent of the damage. I activated the tube. The exposure was brief, no more than a few seconds, and then I was running to the developing tray with the plate clutched in my shaking hands. I worked in darkness, by feel and long practice, immersing the plate in the chemical bath and watching as the image slowly began to emerge. At first, I thought there had been some mistake, that the plate was defective or the exposure had been wrong, because what I was seeing could not possibly be real. His ribcage was there, clearly visible, the bones pale against the darker tissue of his lungs. But where his heart should have been, where that essential muscle should have shown as a faint shadow, there was instead a complex structure of metal and wire. It was a machine, there was no other word for it. A beautiful, terrible machine. I could see gears, so finely crafted they seemed like jewelry. Valves that opened and closed in a rhythm I could almost hear. Tubes that must have served as artificial vessels, carrying blood through a circulatory system that no longer relied on muscle to maintain its function. And at the center of it all, nestled in the protective cage of his ribs, like a jewel in a setting, was a cylindrical chamber that I recognized as a pressure vessel, the kind used in steam engines, but rendered in miniature, impossibly delicate. It was a work of art. It was an abomination. It was the most heartbreaking thing I had ever seen. And there, on the surface of that central chamber, clearly visible in the X-ray image, were letters. They were engraved, not printed, worked into the metal with a precision that spoke of great care and deliberate intent. Eleanor. My name. My name was carved into the artificial heart of the Duke of Ashbourne. I stood staring at the image, unable to process what I was seeing, unable to reconcile the evidence before my eyes with anything that made sense. Why would my name be on his heart? How could my name be on his heart? We had known each other for mere months. This device, this impossible machine, must have been implanted years ago, must have been created by someone with skills far beyond anything commonly available. And yet there was my name, clear and undeniable, permanently engraved in the metal that kept him alive. I heard a sound behind me and turned to find the Duke awake. He had pushed himself to a sitting position and was staring at me with an expression of such profound despair that I felt my own heart, my entirely organic heart, clench in response. "So now you know," he said, his voice rough. "Now you have seen what I am. Not a man, not truly. A collection of parts, some flesh and some metal, animated by machinery and maintained by the skill of a surgeon who should never have been allowed to practice his art." I moved toward him, still holding the radiographic plate, and knelt beside him. The laboratory around us smelled of smoke and chemicals, and in the distance I could hear the bells of the fire brigade approaching. But in that moment, the entire world had contracted to just the two of us, and the terrible truth that lay between us. "Your Grace," I said, and my voice was shaking. "How? How did this happen? And why? Why is my name written on your heart?" He closed his eyes, a gesture of such weariness that it seemed he might never open them again. "Because you killed me, Eleanor," he said. 4 years ago, you killed me, and I loved you too much to stay dead." The words made no sense. I had never met him 4 years ago. I had never killed anyone. I opened my mouth to protest, to demand an explanation, but he held up his hand to stop me. "You do not remember," he said. "Why would you? You were not Eleanor Hartwell then. You had a different name, a different life. And I was not the Duke of Ashbourne, but simply William Ashbourne, a third son with no prospects and no hope of inheriting the title. We met at a scientific lecture, one of those events you attended in disguise to gain entry. You were wearing your aunt's widow veil, and when you lifted it to see a demonstration more clearly, I glimpsed your face and was lost. I stared at him, searching my memory for any recollection of what he described. There had been many lectures, many demonstrations attended in secret over the years. Could I have met him? Could I have forgotten? We spoke afterward, he continued, his eyes still closed. You did not know who I was, and I did not tell you. For the first time in my life, I was simply myself, not defined by my family or my lack of fortune. We met again and again. We fell in love. Or at least, I fell in love. I was never certain if you felt the same, because you guarded your heart carefully, afraid of being discovered, afraid of scandal. Dr. Hartwell appeared in the doorway, his face anxious. Eleanor, the fire is out, and the patient is being taken to the hospital. Are you injured? Is His Grace well? We are both fine, I said, not taking my eyes from the Duke. Give us a moment, please. I must speak with him privately. Dr. Hartwell hesitated, then nodded and withdrew. I heard him directing the fire brigade, his voice fading as he moved down the stairs. And still the Duke sat before me, his artificial heart ticking softly in his chest, my name engraved upon it in metal that would outlast any flesh. Tell me the rest, I said. Tell me what happened. He opened his eyes then, and they were filled with such pain that I almost looked away. I proposed to you, he said simply, in a garden under a moon that seemed too bright for the occasion. And you refused me. You said you could not marry, that your work was too important, that you had fought too hard for your freedom to surrender it to become any man's wife. You were kind about it, gentle, but the answer was final. I tried to imagine it, tried to picture myself refusing a proposal from this man. But all I could see was the present moment, the two of us surrounded by the ruins of the laboratory, and the radiographic image of his mechanical heart still clutched in my trembling hands. I accepted your decision, he continued. What else could I do? I told you I understood, that I wished you well in your pursuits, and then I left London, because I could not bear to remain in the same city knowing you were there but forever beyond my reach. I went north to my family's estate, intending to lose myself in rural obscurity. But fate, or perhaps just poor judgment, had other plans. He paused, and I saw him touch his chest, that unconscious gesture I had noticed so many times, as if reassuring himself that the machinery still functioned. There was an accident on the estate, a new threshing machine, improperly designed. One of the tenant farmers was caught in the mechanism, and I tried to pull him free. The machine did not discriminate between his flesh and mine. It tore through my chest, shredded my heart, left me dying in a field while people screamed for help that would come too late. No, I whispered, though I did not know why I was protesting. This had already happened. It was history, unchangeable. I should have died, he said. I was dying, but my eldest brother, the Duke at the time, had been funding a researcher. A brilliant man, entirely mad, who believed that the human body was simply a machine like any other and that damaged parts could be replaced. He had never successfully performed the procedure on a living subject, but my brother brought me to him and demanded he try. And try he did. For 6 days and nights, he worked on me, cutting away destroyed tissue, installing machinery where my heart had been, connecting artificial vessels to my remaining organs. And it worked, I said softly. After a fashion, he replied. I survived. I lived. But the man I had been died in that field. What woke up in the surgeon's laboratory was something else, something caught between human and machine. My brother died shortly afterward, of fever, and I inherited the title I had never wanted. I came back to London because I could not bear the countryside anymore, could not bear the silence and the memories. And I began looking for you. Why, I asked, though part of me already knew the answer. Why search for the woman who refused you? Because during the surgery, when I was hovering between life and death, the surgeon asked me what I wanted most in the world. I was delirious with pain and laudanum, barely coherent, but I answered with the only truth I had. I wanted Eleanor. I wanted you. And when the surgeon finished constructing my artificial heart, when he engraved it with his mark and his specifications, he added something else. Your name. As if by writing it on the machine that kept me alive, he could grant my dying wish. The radiographic plate slipped from my fingers and fell to the floor. I did not hear it break. I was looking at the Duke, at William, trying to reconcile this story with the fragments of my own memory. Had I met him? Had I refused him? I could not remember, and yet the pain in his eyes suggested he was telling the truth. I came back to find you, he said, but you had vanished. You were no longer attending lectures under your old identity. You had changed your name, taken a position with Dr. Hartwell, become someone new. It took me months to locate you, and when I finally did, I realized I could not simply approach you. You did not remember me. And how could I explain what I had become? How could I tell you that I was no longer entirely human? That every beat of my heart was purchased with machinery and steam? So you became our patron, I said. You watched me from a distance. I told myself that was enough, he agreed. That simply knowing you were well, seeing you pursue the work you loved, would be sufficient. But it was not. I have loved you for 4 years, Eleanor. I loved you when my heart was flesh, and I love you still now that it is metal. The material has changed, but the feeling has not. And I knew that if you ever saw what I truly am, you would be horrified. You would see me as a monster, an abomination, something that should not exist. I reached out and placed my hand over his chest, feeling the steady tick-tick-tick of the mechanism beneath his skin. It was warm, heated by his blood and by the small steam engine that must have powered it. And beneath the strangeness of it, beneath the mechanical rhythm, I could feel something else. I could feel him, the essential William that existed, whether his heart was flesh or metal. I do not see a monster, I said. I see a man who has suffered greatly. I see someone who has endured the impossible and survived. And I see, engraved in metal where it can never be erased, proof that love can persist even when everything else is destroyed. He looked at me then, really looked at me, as if seeing me for the first time. And in his gray eyes, I saw hope begin to kindle, fragile and uncertain. Eleanor, he whispered, what am I to do? How am I to go on, knowing that you know, that you have seen the truth of me? I moved closer, closing the distance between us until I could feel the heat radiating from his body, could smell the bergamot and metal that was his particular scent. You go on by letting me help you, I said. You go on by trusting that I meant what I said. The X-ray does not lie. It shows what is, not what appears to be. And what I see when I look at you is not machinery. It is a man who saved my life tonight, who held a dangerous wire steady so that a stranger might be examined. A man who carries my name not as a burden, but as a declaration of love so absolute he had it written on the very thing that keeps him alive. And then, because I could not help myself, because the revelation had stripped away all pretense and left only truth between us, I leaned forward and pressed my lips to his. He went very still, and for a moment I feared I had made a terrible mistake. But then his arms came around me, pulling me close, and he was kissing me back with a desperation that spoke of 4 years of longing, 4 years of believing he would never be allowed this simple human intimacy again. His lips were warm, perfectly human, and the hand that cupped my face was gentle despite its strength. The only evidence of his artificial heart was the soft ticking I could feel against my chest, a rhythm that seemed to accelerate slightly as we kissed, as if even machinery could respond to emotion. When we finally broke apart, both breathless, he rested his forehead against mine and spoke in a voice rough with feeling. I do not deserve you, he said. I do not deserve your understanding or your kindness. Perhaps not, I replied. but you have them nonetheless. And now that I know the truth, now that there are no more secrets between us, we will find a way forward together." Outside, the city was waking to a winter dawn, and Dr. Hartwell would return soon with questions and concerns. The laboratory would need to be rebuilt, the equipment replaced. There would be complications and consequences, explanations, and perhaps even scandal if the truth of the Duke's condition became known. But in that moment, surrounded by the smell of smoke and chemicals, holding a man whose heart was machinery and whose love was as real as anything I had ever known, I felt something I had not felt in years. I felt hope. And I felt, despite everything, despite the impossibility of our situation, something very much like joy. The weeks that followed the accident were strange and precious, stolen moments between daylight propriety and the honest darkness of evening. We rebuilt the laboratory together, William and I, our hands working side by side to rewire the apparatus and replace the damaged equipment. Dr. Hartwell, bless his trusting nature, seemed to accept the Duke's increased presence as simple dedication to scientific patronage, never suspecting the deeper current that flowed between us. But we were careful. Victorian London did not forgive scandal, and a woman of my position had no protection against the whispers that could destroy a reputation. We maintained the fiction of distant cordiality when others were present, speaking only of voltages and exposure times, of photographic chemistry and patient outcomes. It was only when we were alone that the masks fell away, and I could touch the place where metal met flesh beneath his clothing, could feel the warmth of machinery, and know it for what it truly was, not a replacement for his humanity, but an extension of it, a testament to his will to survive. He told me more about the surgeon who had created his artificial heart, a man named Dr. Cornelius Blackwood, who had studied in Geneva and Vienna before returning to England with theories that most reputable physicians dismissed as madness. Blackwood believed that consciousness resided not in any specific organ, but in the electrical patterns that flowed through the body, and that as long as those patterns could be maintained, a person could survive almost any physical alteration. The heart, he argued, was simply a pump, and pumps could be replicated in metal and steam as easily as in muscle. He was not wrong, William said one evening as we sat together in the quiet laboratory, the gas light turned low and the winter wind howling outside. I am conscious. I think and feel and remember. But sometimes I wonder if I am still the same William who died in that field, or if I am simply a very good copy, a machine that believes itself to be human because it was programmed with human memories. You are you, I told him firmly. The machinery does not define you any more than my bones define me. We are what we choose to be, not what we are made of. He smiled at that, a real smile that transformed his austere features into something almost boyish. You see things very clearly, Eleanor. It is one of the things I have always loved about you. You cut through sentiment and superstition to reach truth. But even as we grew closer, even as I began to understand the rhythm of his mechanical heart and the small rituals required to maintain it, the careful management of pressure and temperature that kept the machinery functioning, I could not shake a growing sense of unease. It began with small things. A man watching the laboratory from across the street, always in the same spot, always at dusk. Letters arriving for William that he read with increasing tension, his jaw tightening as his eyes moved across the pages. And once, when I came to the laboratory early, I found evidence that someone had tried to force the lock on our door, scratches on the metal that had not been there the day before. When I mentioned these concerns to William, he dismissed them as coincidence. London is full of vagrants and curious onlookers, he said. And as for the letters, they are merely business affairs, estate matters that require my attention. You need not worry. But I did worry. I had learned to trust my instincts, and my instincts told me that something was wrong, that the peace we had found was more fragile than it appeared. The truth arrived on a Friday evening in mid-February, delivered in the form of Dr. Cornelius Blackwood himself. I was alone when he came, Dr. Hartwell having departed early to attend a dinner with colleagues from the Royal Society. I was developing plates from the afternoon's examinations, my hands stained with silver nitrate, and my attention focused on the images emerging from the chemical bath. I did not hear the door open, did not sense the presence behind me until a voice spoke, cultured and smooth and somehow wrong in a way I could not immediately define. "You must be Miss Hartwell," the voice said. "Or should I say, the woman whose name decorates my greatest achievement." I turned to find a man standing in the doorway, removing his gloves with meticulous care. He was perhaps 50, well-dressed but not ostentatiously so, with silver-threaded hair and the kind of face that might have been handsome in youth, but had been sharpened by time and perhaps by secrets into something harder, more predatory. His eyes were dark, almost black, and they studied me with the clinical interest of a man examining a specimen. "Who are you?" I asked, though some part of me already knew. "Dr. Cornelius Blackwood," he replied, offering a slight bow. "I am the surgeon who gave the Duke of Ashbourne his second life, and I have come to collect what is owed to me." I set down the plate I had been holding and faced him directly, refusing to show the fear that had begun to coil in my stomach. "The Duke has paid you generously for your services," I said. "What more could you possibly want?" Blackwood smiled, and it was not a pleasant expression. "Money is useful, certainly, but it is not why I practice my art. I saved Lord Ashbourne's life because I needed a test subject, someone whose death was imminent and whose family was desperate enough to permit radical intervention. And for 4 years, he has served admirably as proof that my theories are sound. But now, I require more." He moved into the laboratory, examining our equipment with the casual authority of someone who felt entitled to anything he wished to see. I watched him, my mind racing through possibilities, wondering if I could reach the door before he could stop me. "You see," Blackwood continued, pausing beside the rebuilt X-ray apparatus, "the artificial heart I installed in His Grace was always intended as a prototype, a proof of concept. But to advance my work, to perfect the design, I need access to detailed examinations of how the device functions in a living body. I need radiographic images, measurements, observations. I need the Duke to submit himself to study." "He will never agree to that," I said. "He guards his privacy too carefully." Blackwood turned to look at me, and there was something in his expression that made my blood run cold. "Oh, I think he will," he said, "because if he does not, I will ensure that certain information reaches the appropriate authorities." The Royal College of Surgeons would be most interested to learn that a titled nobleman has been walking among them with an artificial heart. The scandal would be extraordinary. And I imagine society would not look kindly upon a woman who has been meeting secretly with such a man, alone, in the evenings. Your reputation would be destroyed within days. "You are blackmailing him," I said, and the words tasted like poison. "I prefer to think of it as ensuring cooperation," Blackwood replied. "Lord Ashbourne will submit to examination, will allow me to study my creation, or he will face consequences that will strip him of everything he has left, his position in society, his estates, and," Blackwood added, looking directly at me, "his relationship with you. Because who would believe that your association has been innocent? A woman of your class, alone with a duke, for hours at a time. The conclusions people will draw are inevitable." I wanted to strike him. I wanted to seize one of the heavy glass beakers from the shelf and bring it down upon his skull. But violence would solve nothing, and I forced myself to remain calm, to think. "What exactly do you want?" I asked. "Access," Blackwood said simply. "I want Lord Ashbourne to come to my private surgery twice a week for examination. I want detailed radiographic images of his chest cavity. I want to open him, periodically, to inspect the machinery and ensure it is functioning optimally. And I want notes, comprehensive records of any symptoms or changes he experiences. In exchange for his cooperation, I will maintain his secret. His life can continue as it has been, more or less undisturbed. And if he refuses? Then I will destroy him, Blackwood said, and there was no emotion in his voice, only certainty. I created him. I own him in every meaningful sense. He exists because I permit it. And if he will not serve the advancement of science willingly, then he will do so unwillingly after his secret has been exposed and his body claimed by the medical establishment for study. He replaced his gloves, adjusted his coat, and walked to the door. You will tell him I came, he said. You will give him my card, which contains the address of my surgery, and you will impress upon him the urgency of compliance. I expect to see him Monday evening. If he does not appear, I will begin sharing my knowledge with those who would find it most interesting. And then he was gone, leaving behind only his card and the lingering scent of something medicinal, formaldehyde perhaps, the smell of preservation and death. I stood shaking in the empty laboratory, clutching Blackwood's card so tightly the edges cut into my palm. I wanted to believe there was some way out, some solution that would not require William to submit to this monster's demands. But Blackwood held all the power. He knew the truth. He had evidence, and he was clearly willing to use it without mercy. When William arrived an hour later, I told him everything. I watched his face as I spoke, saw the color drain from it until he was pale as the February snow that had begun to fall outside. When I finished, he sat heavily in one of the laboratory chairs and stared at his hands, those elegant, deceptively human hands. I should have known he would come eventually, William said quietly. I have been sending him money to keep him quiet, but money is never enough for men like Blackwood. He wants recognition. He wants to be remembered as the genius who conquered death, and I am his proof. We will refuse, I said. We will find a way to fight him. William looked at me with such sadness that I felt tears prick at my eyes. There is no fighting this, Eleanor. He is right. If the truth emerges, I am finished. The scandal alone would be devastating, but the medical establishment would never rest until they had dissected me, taken apart the machinery in my chest to understand how it works. I would become a curiosity, a specimen in a jar, my humanity irrelevant in the face of scientific interest. Then we run, I said desperately. We leave London, go somewhere he cannot find us, and leave Dr. Hartwell? Leave your work. I will not ask you to sacrifice everything you have built for me. I moved to kneel before him, taking his hands in mine. You are not asking, I said. I am offering. William, I have already lost you once, though I do not remember it. I will not lose you again to this man's ambition. He cupped my face in his hands, his thumbs brushing away the tears I had not realized I was crying. What have I done to deserve you? He whispered. What grace allowed me to carry your name and then to find you again? We sat together in the quiet laboratory as the snow fell outside, holding each other as if we could stop time itself, as if we could remain forever in that moment before decisions had to be made and consequences had to be faced. But time does not stop, not even for love. And eventually the cold forced us to light the lamps and face the reality of our situation. I will go to him, William said finally. I will submit to his examinations. It is the only way to protect you, to protect what we have found together. No, I said, there must be another way. But even as I spoke, I was thinking, planning, examining the problem from every angle as I would examine a radiographic plate, looking for the hidden truth beneath the obvious surface. Blackwood wanted to study the artificial heart. He wanted recognition for his achievement, and he was willing to destroy William to get it. Unless we could offer him something better, unless we could give him what he wanted in a way that did not require William's suffering. An idea began to form, dangerous and half-mad, but it was the only plan I could conceive that might save us. I looked at William, at the man I loved who carried my name engraved in metal, and I made a decision. I have a proposal, I said, but you must trust me, and you must be willing to risk everything on the chance that I am right. He looked at me for a long moment, studying my face with those gray eyes that seemed to see straight through to my soul. Then he smiled, sad and beautiful, and full of the kind of trust that comes only from absolute love. "Tell me," he said, "and I will do whatever you ask." So I told him my plan, and watched as understanding dawned in his expression, followed by fear, and finally by something that might have been hope. It was desperate. It relied on psychology as much as science, and if it failed, we would both be ruined. But if it succeeded, we might finally be free of Dr. Cornelius Blackwood and his threats. We might claim a future where William's artificial heart was no longer a secret to be exploited, but simply a part of who he was, remarkable, but not monstrous. We had 3 days until Monday, 3 days to prepare and to gather everything we would need. 3 days to bet everything on the proposition that the truth, properly presented, could be a stronger weapon than blackmail. I had learned to see through flesh on a Tuesday in November. Now, in February's frozen darkness, I would learn whether I could see clearly enough to save the man I loved from the doctor who had given him life only to use it as leverage. The snow fell heavier outside, covering London in white, and somewhere in the city, Dr. Cornelius Blackwood sat in his surgery, confident in his power over us. He did not yet know that he had made a critical error. He had assumed that William was his creation, his property, his tool to wield as he wished. But William was not his creation anymore. William was loved. And that changed everything. The plan required precision, courage, and a gamble on human nature that I was not entirely certain would succeed. But it was the only path I could see that did not end in William's destruction or our permanent separation. And so I committed to it with the same focus I brought to calibrating the X-ray apparatus. On Saturday morning, I called upon 3 of London's most respected physicians, men whose names appeared regularly in the medical journals and whose opinions shaped the direction of British medicine. I presented myself as Dr. Hartwell's assistant and offered them an opportunity they could not refuse: the chance to witness a revolutionary surgical case, a man living with an artificial heart, on Monday evening at our laboratory. The responses were immediate and enthusiastic. Dr. Marcus Pemberton, head of surgery at Guy's Hospital, agreed at once. Dr. James Whitmore, who had published extensively on cardiac disease, rearranged his schedule to attend. Dr. Samuel Cross, the most conservative of the 3, expressed skepticism, but curiosity won out over doubt, and he too committed to coming. I told them nothing about blackmail or threats. I presented it simply as a medical revelation, a case that would redefine what was possible in surgical intervention. And I let them believe that the patient was offering himself willingly for examination, eager to contribute to the advancement of science. Then I sent a message to Dr. Cornelius Blackwood, delivered by private courier. It was brief and to the point. Your presence is requested Monday evening at the Hartwell Laboratory, Southwark, at 8 o'clock. The Duke of Ashbourne will submit to examination as requested. Come prepared to demonstrate your achievement to your peers. I did not wait for a reply. Either he would come, drawn by ego and the promise of recognition, or he would not. But I believed I understood men like Blackwood. They did not labor in secret simply for the joy of discovery. They wanted acknowledgement. They wanted their names remembered alongside Jenner and Lister and Pasteur, and I was offering him that, though not in the way he expected. William watched me work through these preparations with a mixture of admiration and fear. He understood what I was attempting, the knife's edge we were walking between triumph and disaster. But he trusted me, and that trust gave me strength when my own courage faltered. On Sunday evening, we prepared the laboratory with meticulous care. We cleaned every surface until it gleamed. We arranged chairs in a semicircle facing the examination table. We tested the X-ray apparatus repeatedly, ensuring it would function perfectly when the moment came. And we rehearsed, going over every word William would say, every gesture I would make, until we moved together like a piece of well-crafted machinery, each part supporting the others. Dr. Hartwell returned from his weekend away late Sunday night, full of enthusiasm about the lectures he had attended. When I told him about Monday's gathering, about the distinguished physicians who would be visiting, he was initially bewildered, then delighted, then concerned about the short notice. But I assured him everything was prepared, and that this demonstration would secure the laboratory's reputation for years to come. I did not tell him about the blackmail. I did not tell him that we were gambling everything on a single evening's performance. Some burdens were mine alone to carry, mine and William's. Monday arrived cold and clear, the kind of February day when the light seems crystalline and every edge appears sharper than it should. I dressed carefully that morning, choosing my most professional attire, pinning my hair in a severe style that suggested competence rather than femininity. I needed to be taken seriously. I needed these men to see me as a scientist, not simply as Dr. Hartwell's female assistant. William arrived at 7:30 before any of the others. He was pale but composed, dressed in formal evening clothes that made him look every inch the aristocratic duke. But when he took my hand, I felt the tremor in his fingers, the fear he was working so hard to conceal. "Are you certain about this?" he asked quietly. "There is still time to run, to disappear before they arrive." I squeezed his hand, drawing strength from the contact. "I am certain," I said. "Trust the plan. Trust yourself. And trust that the truth, properly presented, has more power than blackmail ever will." Dr. Pemberton arrived first, at 10 minutes before 8, bringing with him the scent of carbolic soap and an air of professional curiosity. Dr. Whitmore came next, followed shortly by Dr. Cross, both men greeting Dr. Hartwell with the familiarity of colleagues who had known each other for decades. They examined our equipment, asked questions about our radiographic techniques, and expressed admiration for the quality of work being done in such modest surroundings. And then, precisely at 8 o'clock, Dr. Cornelius Blackwood arrived. He entered the laboratory with the confidence of a man who believed himself to be in complete control of the situation. He nodded to the other physicians, men he clearly knew by reputation, if not personal acquaintance, and his eyes found mine with a look of smug satisfaction. He thought he understood what was happening. He thought I had capitulated to his demands and arranged this gathering to provide him with the audience for his examination of William. He had no idea that the performance we were about to give was one he had not scripted. "Gentlemen," Dr. Hartwell said, calling the gathering to order, "thank you for attending on such short notice. My assistant, Miss Hartwell, has arranged this demonstration because we have the extraordinary privilege of presenting a case that I believe will revolutionize cardiac surgery. His Grace, the Duke of Ashbourne, has generously agreed to share with you the details of a procedure performed on him 4 years ago following a catastrophic injury. What you are about to see will challenge everything you believe possible in surgical intervention." William stepped forward, and every eye in the room fixed on him. He looked at me once, drew strength from whatever he saw in my expression, and began to speak. "4 years ago," he said, his voice steady and clear, "I was involved in an accident that destroyed my heart. I should have died in the field where I fell, but my family brought me to Dr. Cornelius Blackwood, a surgeon of extraordinary skill and vision. Dr. Blackwood performed a procedure that has no precedent in medical literature. He removed my damaged heart and replaced it with an artificial organ constructed of metal and powered by steam." There was absolute silence in the room. Dr. Pemberton's mouth had fallen open slightly. Dr. Whitmore was leaning forward, hands gripping his knees. Even Dr. Cross, the skeptic, looked stunned. "I have lived for 4 years with this device," William continued. "It has functioned without failure, maintaining my circulation, allowing me to move through society without anyone suspecting that I am, in essence, a hybrid of man and machine. I have hidden this truth because I feared the response, feared being seen as a monster or a medical curiosity rather than a human being. But Miss Hartwell has convinced me that the advancement of science requires honesty, even when that honesty comes at great personal cost." He began to remove his coat, then his waistcoat, then to unbutton his shirt. The physicians watched, transfixed, as the layers came away to reveal his chest. There, clearly visible even through the skin, were the outlines of machinery, the slight bulge where the artificial heart sat within his ribcage. "Dr. Blackwood," William said, turning to face the surgeon directly, "would you care to explain to these gentlemen exactly what you have created?" For the first time since entering the laboratory, Blackwood looked uncertain. This was not how he had planned for the evening to unfold. He had expected secrecy, private examinations, leverage he could use to maintain control. Instead, he was being asked to present his work openly, before witnesses, under circumstances he had not dictated. But ego is a powerful force, and the opportunity to demonstrate his genius proved irresistible. Blackwood moved forward, his professional demeanor sliding into place like a mask. "What you see, gentlemen," he said, "is the culmination of 15 years of research into mechanical cardiac replacement. The device consists of a central pressure chamber constructed of gold alloy resistant to corrosion from bodily fluids. This chamber is connected to a miniature steam engine, no larger than a pocket watch, which maintains pressure sufficient to circulate blood through the body. Valves, also gold alloy, regulate the flow, mimicking the action of a natural heart. The entire apparatus weighs approximately 6 ounces and requires minimal maintenance." "Show them," William said quietly. "Use the X-ray to show them the full extent of your achievement." I moved to activate the apparatus, and within moments, the ghostly image of William's chest cavity appeared on the viewing screen. The physicians crowded around, their earlier shock giving way to professional fascination. They could see everything: the delicate machinery, the artificial vessels, the perfect integration of metal and flesh. And they could see, clearly visible on the central chamber, the engraved letters that spelled my name. "Extraordinary," Dr. Pemberton breathed. "The precision of the work, the audacity of the concept." "Dr. Blackwood, this is revolutionary." "The implications are staggering," Dr. Whitmore added. "If this technology can be refined, if the procedure can be standardized, we could save thousands of lives annually. Heart disease is one of the leading causes of death in England. You have demonstrated that it need not be fatal." Dr. Blackwood straightened, pride evident in his posture. "I have been attempting to bring this work before the Royal College for years," he said. "But without proof, without a living subject to demonstrate its efficacy, my theories were dismissed as fantasy. And now you have your proof," I said, stepping forward. "You have a subject who has lived successfully for 4 years with an artificial heart. You have witnesses from 3 of London's most prestigious hospitals who can attest to what they have seen. You have everything you need to present your case to the medical establishment and claim the recognition you deserve." I paused, letting the words settle, watching as understanding began to dawn in Blackwood's eyes. He was starting to realize that we had outmaneuvered him, that by bringing his work into the open, we had stripped away his leverage while simultaneously offering him what he wanted most. "However," I continued, "this can only work if His Grace is treated as a partner in this revelation, not as a specimen. He must retain his dignity, his privacy where it matters, and his autonomy over his own body. Any attempt to exploit him, to treat him as property rather than as a human being, would result in his immediate withdrawal of cooperation. And without his cooperation, you have no proof. Just theories and claims that no one will believe." Dr. Cross, who had been silent throughout, finally spoke. "Miss Hartwell is correct," he said. "If this case is to be presented to the medical community, it must be done ethically. His Grace has lived as a gentleman for 4 years, has functioned in society without incident. He is clearly still possessed of his faculties, his personality, his essential humanity. To treat him as anything less would be unconscionable." Blackwood looked around the room, seeing the agreement on every face. He had been hoping to control this revelation, to parcel it out on his own terms while maintaining his power over William. Instead, he was being offered a different bargain: public recognition in exchange for treating his patient with respect. Very well, Blackwood said finally. I agree to your terms. His Grace will be consulted as a colleague, not examined as a specimen. We will present this case jointly to the Royal College with full acknowledgement of his contribution and his right to privacy. William extended his hand, and after a moment's hesitation, Blackwood shook it. The gesture sealed the agreement, witnessed by 3 of London's most respected physicians. Blackwood had won his recognition, but he had lost his weapon. He could no longer threaten us with exposure because the exposure had happened on our terms, in a context that protected William's humanity even as it revealed his mechanical heart. The evening continued for another 2 hours. The physicians asked questions, examined the radiographic plates, discussed the implications of the technology with the excitement of men witnessing history being made. Dr. Hartwell, once he recovered from his initial shock, threw himself into the discussion with enthusiasm, already planning papers and presentations. And through it all, William and I exchanged glances, communicating without words the relief and triumph we both felt. We had won. Not by running, not by hiding, but by transforming the secret that Blackwood had tried to use against us into a revelation that served our purposes instead. When the physicians finally departed, promising to return for follow-up examinations and planning their presentations to the Royal College, Dr. Hartwell pulled me aside. "Eleanor," he said, his eyes concerned behind his spectacles, "you took an enormous risk arranging this without consulting me first." "I know," I said. "I am sorry for the deception, but it was the only way to protect His Grace from those who would have exploited him." Dr. Hartwell looked at William, who stood by the window watching the street below, then back at me. "There is more to this than professional concern, is there not?" he asked gently. I met his eyes and nodded. "There is," I admitted. "I have come to care for him deeply, and he for me." "I thought as much," Dr. Hartwell said, and to my surprise he smiled. "I am not so old that I cannot recognize love when I see it, Eleanor, and I cannot fault your choice. The Duke is a remarkable man, and not simply because of his mechanical heart. He has supported this laboratory generously and treated you with respect. If you have found happiness together, despite the unusual circumstances, then I am glad of it." "Thank you," I whispered, feeling tears threaten. "However," he continued, his tone turning serious, "you must understand that your relationship will face challenges. Society is not kind to women who step outside prescribed boundaries, and an unmarried woman associating closely with a duke, even one engaged in scientific collaboration, will attract gossip." "I know," I said. "We will be careful." "See that you are," he replied. "I would hate to lose my finest assistant to scandal." After Dr. Hartwell departed, William and I were finally alone. The laboratory was quiet except for the hiss of the gas lamps and the soft tick-tick-tick of the mechanical heart in William's chest. He came to me and took my hands, raising them to his lips to kiss my knuckles. "You saved me," he said. "You took an impossible situation and transformed it into something we could survive. How did you know it would work?" "I did not know," I admitted. "I hoped. I gambled that Blackwood's desire for recognition was stronger than his desire for control. And I believed that if we presented the truth properly, with the right witnesses, we could claim the narrative before he could use it against us." "You are extraordinary," William said. "When I proposed to you 4 years ago, you refused me because you valued your freedom and your work. I have loved you all this time for that choice, even though it broke my heart, because it meant you were strong enough to choose yourself, even when it cost you something precious." I looked up at him, seeing in his gray eyes the depth of feeling that had survived death and machinery and 4 years of separation. And I understood then why he had never resented my refusal, why his love had endured even through transformation and loss. "I made a different choice tonight," I said softly. "I chose you. I chose us. Does that make me weaker?" "No," he said, pulling me close until I could feel the warmth of him, could hear the mechanical rhythm of his heart against my ear. It makes you human. We are allowed to change our minds, to grow, to discover that what we once thought we needed is not what we need now. 4 years ago, you needed freedom. Tonight, you chose partnership. Both choices were brave. We stood together in the quiet laboratory, holding each other as the city beyond the windows settled into the late-night stillness. There would be challenges ahead, I knew that. Society would talk. There would be those who viewed William as a curiosity or a threat, and the mechanical heart in his chest required maintenance and care that would be our constant companion. But we would face it together. I had learned to see through flesh on a Tuesday in November, and I had discovered that sometimes what lies beneath the surface is more beautiful, more essential than what appears on it. William's heart was metal, but his love was real. And that was all that mattered. In March, the presentation to the Royal College of Surgeons took place. Dr. Blackwood presented his work with William standing beside him, living proof that the theories were sound. The medical community reacted with a mixture of awe and skepticism, but the evidence was undeniable. William lived. He functioned. He was more than the sum of his mechanical parts. Papers were published. Discussions raged in the journals about the ethics and implications of mechanical organ replacement. Dr. Blackwood achieved the recognition he had craved, though he was forced to share it with others, forced to acknowledge that his creation was not property, but partnership. And gradually, the scandal we had feared never materialized. William was too useful to the medical establishment, too important as a test case for revolutionary technology. The Royal College requested regular examinations, all conducted respectfully and with his full consent. He became something of a celebrity in scientific circles, though he maintained his privacy in social settings, and those who knew the truth kept it. Dr. Hartwell expanded the laboratory, hired additional assistants, and our radiographic work continued. I remained his most trusted collaborator, though everyone in our professional circles now knew that I was also the Duke of Ashbourne's partner in every sense that mattered, even if society had not yet caught up to reality. William and I did not marry immediately. I was not yet ready to surrender the independence I had fought so hard to claim, and he understood that. But we built a life together nonetheless, divided between my rooms in Southwark and his estate in Mayfair, between scientific pursuits and quiet evenings where we talked of everything and nothing, where I maintained the machinery in his chest with the same careful attention I brought to my radiographic work. And every time I listened to that mechanical heart, every time I adjusted the pressure or cleaned the valves, I saw my name engraved in gold and remembered that love is not diminished by being made visible. Whether written in flesh or metal, whether beating with muscle or ticking with clockwork, a heart that carries another's name is a heart that has chosen to live and to love despite all obstacles. The London fog still rolled in from the Thames on winter evenings. The gas lamps still flickered along the cobblestones. The city still moved to its ancient rhythms, resistant to change even as change happened all around it. But I had learned that beneath the surface of everything, if you knew how to look, there were miracles waiting to be discovered. I had learned to see through flesh, and I had found, in a man whose heart was machinery, proof that humanity is not defined by what we are made of, but by what we choose to love. William had chosen me twice, once with a heart of flesh and once with a heart of metal, and both times his love had been absolute. And I had chosen him. Not because he was perfect, not because our life together would be easy, but because when I looked at him through the penetrating light of truth, when I stripped away all artifice and pretense, I saw exactly what I needed to see. I saw a man who would hold a dangerous wire steady so a stranger might be saved. I saw a man who had died for love and returned changed but unbroken. I saw a man whose artificial heart beat with a rhythm that now matched my own, two different mechanisms working toward the same essential purpose. I saw the future, and it was beautiful and strange and more than I had ever imagined possible. The X-ray does not lie. It shows what is, not what appears to be. And what lay beneath the surface of the Duke of Ashbourne, beneath the machinery and metal, was the same thing that beat in any human heart. The capacity to love beyond reason, beyond death, beyond the boundaries of what was thought possible. His heart was cybernetic, but it was also, in every way that mattered, true.